So we've been going basically at the pace of a chapter a week. There's no way we're going to get through the book of Joshua going that pace. But there's some of the chapters we'll probably not get a chance to cover. But tonight I'm going to try to attempt to cover two chapters, chapters 9 and 10. And to do that, I'll kind of change up our format a little bit, the way we've kind of been going, and I'll read a good portion of the chapter, and then we'll kind of break it down, and I've listed some of those things to you here, and we'll go through that a little bit, but then draw some conclusions, some lessons to be learned. I will say, I'm sure there's many more lessons out of chapter 9 that we could learn. I've only listed two here tonight, but chapter 10 is one of those lessons we could probably go on and on and on about lessons to be learned, and some of Joshua is just like that. But just to recap, children of Israel have entered the land of Canaan, crossed over to Jordan, attacked Jericho, and then went on to Ai. First time they attacked Ai, there was sin in the camp. They were defeated. They got rid of the sin in the camp. Now they've attacked Ai and they won. And that brings us to chapter 9. So let's just read chapter 9. Again, I'm using the English Standard Version. But I think most of you can follow along with that. As soon as all the kings who were beyond the Jordan, in the hill country and in the lowland, all along the coast of the great sea toward Lebanon, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites heard of this. What is this? Just pausing. It's the defeat of Ai. They gathered together as one to fight against Joshua and Israel. Verse 3, but when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, they on their part acted with cunning and went and made ready provisions and took worn out sacks for their donkeys and wineskins, worn out and torn and mended, with worn out, patched sandals on their feet, and worn out clothes. And all their provisions were dry and crumbly. And they went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal, and said to him and to the men of Israel, we have come from a distant country, so now make a covenant with us. But the men of Israel said to the Hivites, perhaps you live among us. Then how can we make a covenant with you? They said to Joshua, we are your servants. And Joshua said to them, who are you and where do you come from? They said to him, from a very distant country your servants have come, because of the name of the Lord your God. For we have heard a report of him, and all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon, the king of Heshbon, and to Og, king of Bashan, who lived in Ashtaroth. So our elders and all the inhabitants of our country said to us, take provisions in your hand for the journey and go to meet them and say to them, we are your servants. Come now and make a covenant with us. Here's our bread. It was still warm when we took it from our houses as our food for the journey on the day we set out to come to you. But now, behold, it is dry and crumbly. These wineskins were new when we filled them, and behold, they have burst. And these garments and sandals of ours are worn out from the very long journey. So the men took some of their provisions, but did not ask counsel from the Lord. And Joshua made peace with them, and made a covenant with them to let them live, and the leaders of the congregation swore to them. At the end of 3 days after they had made a covenant with them, they heard that they were their neighbors and that they lived among them. And the people of Israel set out and reached their cities on the third day. Now their cities were Gibeon, and pardon me with these names, Shapira, Beeroth, and Kiriath Jearim. But the people of Israel did not attack them, because the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the God of Israel. Then all the congregation murmured against the leaders. But all the leaders said to all the congregation, "We have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we may not touch them. This we will do to them. Let them live, lest wrath be upon us because of the oath that we swore to them." And the leaders said to them, "Let them live." So they became cutters of wood and drawers of water for all the congregation, just as the leaders had said of them. Joshua summoned them, and he said to them, "Why did you deceive us, saying, 'We are very far from you,' when you dwell among us? Now therefore you are cursed, and some of you shall never be anything but servants, cutters of wood and drawers of water for the house of my God." They answered Joshua, "Because it was told to your servants for a certainty that the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you all the land and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land from before you. So we feared greatly for our lives because of you and did this thing. And now, behold, we are in your hand. Whatever seems good and right in your sight to do to us, do it." And he did this to them and delivered them out of the hand of the people of Israel, and they did not kill them. But Joshua made them that day cutters of wood and drawers of water for the congregation for the altar of the Lord to this day in the place that he should choose. So here we have the Gibeonite deception, and there's some interesting things here in this passage as we kind of dive into it. A couple things that we've seen happen in some of the other chapters. One is that this news of the Israelites had spread and had traveled. And what's interesting about what the Gibeonites said to Joshua later, what did they hear about the Israelites? What were some of the things? Or really, what did they hear about God? All right, they had even heard what God did to Egypt. And now, how long ago was that for them? 40 plus years, you know. But they had heard what God had done to them in Egypt, what he had also done to the kings on the other side of the Jordan, and then what had happened here to Jericho and Ai. And so there's one other interesting thing. What else did they hear other than those things? Let's see if I can find the verse. All right. So as it pertains to them, they knew the order was then, hey, they're going to come after us and they're going to kill us. So basically, they had decided, hey, and instead of dying, let's just go be their servants, at least we live. And let's go make a covenant with them. And so that's basically what they had done. But before that, Joshua gives us this little technique that is written. He'll tell you a little bit, and then he'll back up and kind of tell you some more details, then he'll come back to it again. So notice verse 1 and 2. Basically, as soon as all the kings heard of this, if you take the first few words and the last few words of verse 1, verse 2, they gathered together as one to fight against Joshua and Israel. So that's important. We're going to come to that in verse 10. So he's given us this preview that these kings, once they heard these things, they gathered together as one, and they decided we're going to come together and fight Israel. Instead of Israel coming after each city and conquering each city. We're going to join our forces together, basically, and fight together against Israel. Maybe we'll have better luck together against Israel. So verses 1 and 2, the other nations heard about these things. They gathered their forces together as one to fight. But verse 3, Gibeon was different. This city was different. When they heard, they decided, no, we're not going to fight against them. We're going to try and make a covenant with them. So they came up with a deception. Was it a good idea or a bad idea to have that deception? All right, it worked out in one sense. I guess they got the covenant made first. Basically what they had done is said, we've come from a long ways off. We came from this far country. We have, knows our sandals, knows our bread, our provisions, our wineskins, all those things. We've traveled this long ways, and they really hadn't traveled that long ways. They basically come from a nearby city, and they're called neighbors here, part of it. But they had come from a nearby city, but they had come up with this deception to indicate that they had traveled a long ways, because we've heard of how powerful your God is, and we've heard about these things. And they just knows verse 7, the men of Israel came, perhaps you live among us, then how can we make a covenant with you? But they said, we are your servants. And so they basically had indicated, we're okay, working for you, we're okay serving, we basically just want to live. So they approached Joshua, and there's a key point here, I think, that is inserted here in verse 14, and what was that? They didn't ask the Lord. And so, there's twice that has happened so far in Joshua. One, when they went to Ai the first time, they didn't ask counsel of the Lord. And here is another time that a mistake is made because they didn't ask counsel from the Lord. One of the things, I think that's a natural lesson that Joshua's just laying out here for us, is that it's wise for us to ask counsel from the Lord on any decision, on every decision, to ask counsel of the Lord. But they approached Joshua, and the bottom line was a covenant was made. And so they agreed not to attack them, not to kill them. They agreed to let them live. They made this covenant with them. But then after the covenant was made, it came out that they basically had not traveled. And so then what happens when the truth comes out? There's Joshua's, well, who's stuck? Joshua and his people are stuck. And I guess you could say so are the others. But here we find that Joshua calls them out. Like when they hear of this talk, basically verse 22, Joshua summoned them and asked them, why did you deceive us? Saying, we are very far from you when you dwell among us. And Joshua comes down on them pretty hard there. And I can imagine that was a scary situation there for them. Now, was everybody on Israel's side in a total agreement with Joshua on this? No. What was the case here? There was some murmuring going on, and there's some disagreement. And apparently the leaders that had made the agreement, the covenant, verse 18, they had made this covenant, but the congregation murmured against the leaders. But the leaders said to all the congregation, verse 19, we have sworn to them by the Lord, the God of Israel, and now we may not touch them. And so they were emphasizing that agreement. But we see here that Joshua basically says the end result is you're forever going to be cutters of wood and drawers of water. I'm sure whoever those people were with the children of Israel, they were probably happy that they no longer had to be cutters of wood and drawers of water. Fine, we'll let these people do that. But they basically said in verse 25, the people of Gibeon said, whatever seems good and right in your sight to do to us, do it. And, in one sense, the people were stuck, but in the other sense, they were very happy. They basically got what they wanted. So we've kind of summarized. I should have had the slide going. But there's a couple lessons here that I wanted us to notice. First one is we should honor our covenants. I think, the strongest lesson here that's all throughout this passage is that there's this tremendous dedication to honoring the promise, honoring the covenants there. What would our world be like if everyone honored their covenants? If everybody honored their agreements? It'd be a different place, wouldn't it? It's amazing to me that contracts and handshakes and verbal agreements just don't mean as much today as what they used to. But sometimes we learn those people who, when they say they're going to do something, you know who you can depend on and you know who you can't depend on. And when somebody, when you can't depend on somebody, you just don't rely. You don't want to enter a contract or agreement with them anymore. But others, what they say they're going to do, they're going to do. But here, that's a certain lesson to us. Another is beware of sabotage when things seem to be going God's way. We've mentioned this before, even with the situation with Ai and the sin of Achan. But we see it all throughout the Bible. And Satan's hard at work, and we need to be careful and beware aware of sabotage, and sabotage even from within. These group of people came in to be them, and we'll see later on that they honored the covenant, but it wasn't necessarily the easiest thing to do at all times. And so one of the things that comes back to haunt the children of Israel in the big picture is that the children of Israel didn't drive out all the inhabitants of the land. And ultimately, isn't that what they're fighting about now? It's still fighting about that today, and different ones lay claim to the land, and so we see that continuing on. But that's basically chapter 9 in a summary. Any other thoughts or comments on chapter 9?
It's interesting to go back to verse 7. They were initially suspicious of these guys, but then the guys, they kind of gave their spiel and they said, okay, they didn't vet them at all. Just let it go.
And what was the key in that? They didn't ask counsel of the Lord there. And certainly lessons for us to learn there. Other thoughts?
It's also interesting that the truth about it all came out 3 days after they made the covenant. If they took a little bit more time to think it over, even then.
Good point. Good point. All right, we're going to dive in chapter 10. And what I'm going to do is read verses 1 through 28 here, and we'll pause there. And again, I apologize for some of the names here. As soon as Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, heard how Joshua had captured Ai and had devoted it to destruction, doing to Ai and its king as he had done to Jericho and its king, and how the inhabitants of Gibeon had made peace with Israel and were among them, he feared greatly, because Gibeon was a great city, like one of the royal cities, and because it was greater than Ai, and all its men were warriors. So Adonizedek, king of Jerusalem, sent to Hoham, king of Hebron, to Piram, king of Jarmuth, to Japhia, king of Lachish. I should let somebody else read this. And to Deber, king of Eglon, saying, "Come up to me and help me. Let us strike Gibeon, for it has made peace with Joshua and with the people of Israel." Then the 5 kings of the Amorites, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon, gathered their forces and went up with all their armies and encamped against Gibeon and made war against it. And the men of Gibeon sent to Joshua at the camp in Gilgal, saying, "Do not relax your hand from your servants. Come up to us quickly and save us and help us. For all the kings of the Amorites who dwell in the hill country are gathered against us." So Joshua went up from Gilgal, he and all the people of war with him, and all the mighty men of valor. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Do not fear them, for I have given them into your hands. Not a man of them shall stand before you." So Joshua came upon them suddenly, having marched up all night from Gilgal. Let me just pause there for just a second. It's about to get even better, but let's just sum up just a little bit of what's happened here so far. First of all, 5 kings have united against the ally of Israel. Basically, they've gathered together all to fight. We're told at the first of chapter 9 that they're gathering together and decide to make this pact, but then chapter 10 tells us that they also heard how Gibeon had basically joined forces with Israel. So they gathered together and they've made this pact to strike Gibeon. Now, why would they choose to strike Gibeon? Why do you suppose? It was a mighty city. Why not attack Israel? Okay. Could be more dangerous then. Okay, so apparently between the two, even though they respected Gibeon because it's a mighty city, they're joining forces together, 5 kings, and they said, "Hey, we're going to take out Gibeon first. We're going to attack them." And because it's made peace with Joshua. I think they rathered to attack Gibeon. Even though it's a mighty city, they were going to join forces together and attack Gibeon to get them out of the way. But we see, what does Gibeon do? They call on Israel for help. They've just made this covenant, but what's interesting, where are the people of Gibeon? They're north of Jerusalem. They're home. They're in their home. They're north of there. It's apparently between Jerusalem and where the Israelites were here at this time. But if I remember my map correctly, do you remember? That isn't Gibeon in between Jerusalem and Shechem, basically, in that area? Not far from there. Okay. Some of you there are better with the the maps than me. But here Gibeon calls for help. And it's interesting how they phrase words. They say, do not slack your hand. Do not relax your hand. Come up to us quickly. What does Joshua do? He gathered all his men. Who did he gather? The best, the mighty men of valor, the same ones that when they were ready to get after Ai, he gathered them, the mighty men of valor. He goes to attack, and apparently there's also a conversation with who? With God. Because here we see in verse 8, the Lord says to Joshua, do not fear them, for I have given them into your hands. Not a man of them shall stand before you. In the last verse that we read right there, so Joshua came upon them suddenly, having marched up all night from Gilgal. So Joshua hears this. He gathers all his men, and what do? They march all night. They did not delay. They didn't even wait till the next morning. They go all night. They have God's blessings. God has already told them not a person's going to stand from among them, but here they've marched all night. Now, I don't know, I guess you could picture yourselves in that situation. It's going to be interesting. You'll see what happens here as the day goes on. And certainly to me, one of the greatest miracles in the Bible. Certainly not greater than the resurrection and virgin birth and some of those things, but here definitely one of the greatest miracles in the Bible in my mind on several fronts. Let's look at starting verse 10. And the Lord threw them into a panic before Israel, who struck them with a great blow at Gibeon, and chased them by the way of the ascent of Beth-horon, and struck them as far as Azekah and Makkedah. And as they fled before Israel, while they were going down the ascent of Beth-horon, the Lord threw down large stones from heaven on them, as far as Azekah, and they died. There were more who died because of the hailstones than the sons of Israel killed with the sword. At that time, Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord gave the Amorites over to the sons of Israel, and said in the sight of Israel, sun, stand still at Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, until the nation took vengeance on their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Jasher? The sun stopped in the midst of heaven and did not hurry to set for about a whole day. There has been no day like it, before or since, when the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. So Joshua returned and all Israel to him to the camp at Gilgal. So what are some of the amazing things that happen here in these few verses that we read? The hailstones. Now, I've seen some big hailstones. I've seen, we had a tornado hit a trailer that we lived in one time, and I was called from school, hey, tornado hit your trailer, and I go and I see hailstones all coming up the road, and it looked like snow. It was October, and this was in South Alabama. It was not snow, but there was a lot of hailstones piled up. and those were amazing. But can you imagine hailstones big enough to kill men? I mean, we've seen pictures of softball-sized hailstones, but these had to be a whole bunch of them or bigger, because it killed all these, or a lot of these men dead. More dead there than died because of the hailstones than because of the sons of Israel killed with a sword. What else happened? The sun stood still. Joshua prayed to God and asked for the sun to stand still, the moon to stand still, and we're told that it didn't hurry to set for about a whole day. Basically, God calls it to remain daylight. They had marched all night to get there, then fought all day, and then let this go on in further till they finished. And verse 15 is just hilarious to me. So after all this, then Joshua returned and all Israel with him to the camp at Gilgal. Okay, we took care of business. And they just returned back to their camp after hailstones came, and the sun stops, and all that takes place. All right, they threw them into a panic. And not only they threw them into a panic, what happened when the confusion started? They're going down, basically being attacked as they're going down, descending during that time. All right, let's pick up verse 16. These 5 kings fled and hid themselves at the cave at Makkedah. And it was told to Joshua, the 5 kings have been found, hidden in the cave at Makkedah. And Joshua said, roll large stones against the mouth of the cave and set men by it to guard them, but do not stay there yourselves. Pursue your enemies and attack their rear guard. Do not let them enter their cities, for the Lord your God has given them into your hand. When Joshua and the sons of Israel had finished striking them with a great blow until they were wiped out, and when the remnant that remained of them had entered into the fortified cities, then all the people returned safe to Joshua in the camp at Makkedah. Not a man moved his tongue against any of the people of Israel. Then Joshua said, open the mouth of the cave and bring those 5 kings out from the cave, out to me from the cave. And they did so and brought those 5 kings out to him from the cave, the king of Jerusalem, the king of Hebron, the king of Jarmuth, the king of Lachish, and the king of Eglon. When they had brought those kings out to Joshua, Joshua summoned all the people of Israel, all the men of Israel, and said to the chiefs of the men of war who had gone with him, come near, put your feet on the necks of these kings. Then they came near and put their feet on their necks, and Joshua said to them, do not be afraid or dismayed. Be strong and courageous, for thus the Lord will do to all your enemies against whom you fight. And afterward Joshua struck them and put them to death, and he hanged them on 5 trees, and they hung on the trees to the evening. But at the time of the sun going down of the sun, Joshua commanded, and they took them down from the trees and threw them into the cave where they had hidden themselves. And they set large stones against the mouth of the cave, which remain there to this very day. As for Makkedah, Joshua captured it on that day and struck it and its king with the edge of the sword. He devoted to destruction every person in it. He left none remaining, and he did to the king of Makkedah just as he had done to the king of Jericho. Let's see. I want us to jump down to verse 41. And Joshua struck them from Kadesh Barnea as far as Gaza, and all the country of Goshen as far as Gibeon. And Joshua captured all these kings and their land at one time, because the Lord God of Israel fought for Israel. Then Joshua returned, and all Israel with him, to the camp at Gilgal. So let's notice a few lessons here about that, from chapter 10. And this is, again, not an extensive list. But first one, call for help when you need it. Here's the children, the people of Gibeon. They're about to be attacked from these 5 kings, and they call for help. Do you call for help? My wife criticizes me because I'm probably one of the last ones to call for help. If I call you for help, it's probably because I really could not figure it out myself. I'm usually someone, I'll try my best to handle something myself, and I'm just not the best at calling for help sometimes. But one lesson that spoke to me from this is we need to call for help when we need it. Another is to choose our allies carefully. Gibeon chose smart in this case. But I wonder sometimes, do we choose our allies smart? Do we align ourselves with people well? We need to choose our allies carefully. Definitely, we need to make sure we're on God's side. Boy, what happened to the people that were not on God's side in this case? They got dead. We need to make sure we're on God's side. I tell you something, this Joshua just stands out more and more, and that just should stick in our minds. We need to make sure we're on God's side. We should honor our covenants, and we mentioned that from the last. And I would say when others need us, put forth our best. Joshua, when he was called on, he didn't send the scrubs. He chose the mighty men of valor, and they went and helped, and they honored those that needed help there. So we should put forth our best. It is very interesting, and what's even more so, here you have these 5 kings that said, okay, we better unite, and it didn't matter. It didn't matter. Joshua and them marched through the night, and they just take care of all five kings and all of them, or I should say God takes care of them. Another lesson, be bold in our prayers. I list some other verses for you. I would encourage you later to write this down. God knows in our heart when we ask of him, whether we're asking in belief or not. But sometimes I think we ask things of God that are going to happen already, or we ask almost doubting, and we give God outs, I guess you could say. But we need to be bold in our prayers, but remember that the power is not in us. There's a couple other lessons here. God hears our prayers. We should see that here. But also God does his will and does not do what man tells him to do. So notice, and so it sounds like I'm contradicting myself here, but notice verse 14, there has been no day like it before or since when the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. So God isn't going to do what we say just because we can't tell God what to do in our prayers. But what does the Bible tell us about prayers? You receive not because you ask not. His will be done. But the prayer of a effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. I encourage you to read these other passages on being bold in our prayer. Christ is the reason why we can be bold in our prayers. Yes?
David, even though Gibeon was a great city, and they deceived the Israelites, but they also recognized that God made the Israelites great. And they humbled themselves, knowing that if they became part of the Israelites, they would receive that God
Protection from God.
that when God approved them going to heaven.
That's right.
They humbled themselves.
That's right. Okay, gotta get to this real quick. No matter what the odds, with God on our side, we will win. And my last point, I just had to slide this in somewhere. God raises and lowers leaders of countries. And I encourage you to read those passages. Let me say this. A lot of us may be worried about next week. God's will is going to be done, and God raises and lowers leaders. I encourage you, Daniel 1:2 says that God gave Judah there to Nebuchadnezzar. Read Romans 13, 1 Timothy 2:1 and 2. Read those. No matter what happens Tuesday, who's in control? God. So then the question is, how are we going to respond? No matter what happens Tuesday, we need to read Romans 13. Need to read that. Now, I could get political. I'm not trying to get political here, but no matter what happens, we do realize God is in control, and then we have a response to that.
Always like the statement, man proposes, God disposes. That's
Hey,
way of saying that the Lord's will be us saying, even if we present something in our knowledge, which is not perfect, we are saying, but thy will be done. Whatever we propose, you do it this way.
He is going to do it. I think another lesson for us, though, is not, we always need to pray with that, for sure. And we need to acknowledge that his wills be done. But that is also not a license for us to give up on prayer, and that does no good to ask for prayer. I think the other passages, especially the ones there, tell us that through Christ we can be bold because of Christ, not because of us, not because we carry some weight, because we're so good as a Christian or we've reached some level, but because of Christ we can be bold in our prayers. Thank you for your comments.